I stood at the polished oak door of the nursing home, watching the taillights of my son's luxury SUV disappear down the road. It wasn't just his car disappearing. It was the last sight of the life he had promised me, the last of the warmth. He had traded his mother's well-being for a cleaner house and a less complicated marriage, and I knew in that moment that the debt for his abandonment would eventually be settled. My name is Eleanor Vance. I was 72. I didn't have millions, but I had security, a small paid-off home, a comfortable pension from 30 years as a dedicated school administrator, and the unwavering belief in my only son, David. When my health started failing slightly, David insisted I sell my home. I did, giving him the majority of the proceeds, nearly $300,000, to pay off a chunk of his expensive mortgage. His exact words, which I recorded in my memory every day, were, "Mom, this is the last move you'll ever make. You'll always live with me. That money ensures your lifetime comfort here." The comfort lasted only 3 weeks. David's wife, Melissa, a social climber obsessed with appearances, quickly deemed me a visual nuisance. She hated the walker, she hated the faint smell of medicine, and she certainly hated that my presence disrupted their cocktail parties. Melissa: "David, she keeps leaving her books on the white marble. It ruins the aesthetic. We simply can't have this. It's affecting my stress levels." David, the man I had raised to be a protector, chose the smooth marriage over the simple promise. He did the paperwork swiftly, efficiently, and with terrifying lack of emotion. He didn't take me to a place of dignity. He took me to Autumn Leaves Retirement Home, a facility 90 miles away, chosen precisely because it was out of sight and out of mind. I remember the drop-off. He spent 5 minutes with the nurse, avoiding eye contact with me before rushing out. David D. "I'll call you next week, Mom. Be good." He never looked back. That night, lying in the thin sheets of my sterile room, I realized the full scale of my error. The isolation was immediate and crushing. For the next 2 years, the nursing home became my prison. The food was bland, the staff was overworked, and the loneliness was absolute. David visited only 4 times in 24 months. Each visit lasted less than an hour, always accompanied by the uncomfortable shuffling of his feet as he checked his watch. He never brought Lily, my only granddaughter, claiming the facility was too depressing for her. My only window to the outside world was my television and the local papers left in the common room. And this is where the emotional layering began. I realized David wasn't just neglecting me. He was actively spending the wealth I had given him to buy a reputation. The first insult, 6 months in. A TV news segment showed David and Melissa being honored as the city's young financial leaders. David spoke about family values and giving back to the community. The second insult, 1 year in. He sold my old furniture, the antique pieces I cherished, in an online auction, using the money to buy an expensive pool table for his man cave. The auction listing mentioned they were unwanted, the outdated pieces. The final insult, 20 months in. I saw the full-page photo on the society page. David and Melissa hosting a massive black tie fundraiser for hospital senior wing. The irony was a physical ache. He was spending thousands to be publicly seen as a savior of the elderly. While his own mother lay forgotten, all this time, David assumed I was barely scraping by on my small remaining pension, patiently waiting for him to inherit the final small sum. But he didn't know about Clara Jensen, my lifelong friend and brilliant estate lawyer. She visited me every month, not to offer sympathy, but to review the highly complex offshore portfolio I had quietly established years ago with my late husband's insurance money. My total estate was not $300,000. It was $3.5 million, and I spent those 2 years drafting the most precise, unbreakable legal document of my life. I was preparing to settle the debt. I passed away peacefully a month ago. David and Melissa's performance at the funeral was sickeningly theatrical. Loud sobs, dramatic eulogies about my unwavering love. I watched them, knowing their true reward was coming. 2 weeks later, the final scene. David, Melissa, and their shark of a lawyer, Mr. Thompson, sat across the table from Ms. Jensen. David was barely containing his excitement. Clara Jensen. Mrs. Vance's estate is valued at approximately $3.5 million. Thompson, the lawyer, gasped. David and Melissa stared, their greed barely concealed. Clara Jensen. To my son, David Thomas Vance. I leave the rest of my liquid estate, the entire $3.4 million. David actually let out a small cheer. Thompson tried to maintain composure. Clara Jensen. However, there are two specific, non-negotiable conditions to this bequest. As mandated by Mrs. Vance, she slid the first document across. Clara Jensen. Condition 1. For David to receive the $3.4 million, he must first sign this document, Acknowledgement of Abandonment. The room went silent. The contract, drafted with surgical precision, forced David to formally confess, before a notary and his own lawyer, that he voluntarily placed his mother in a substandard home 90 miles away solely to prioritize his wife's superficial comfort. David. This is character assassination. I'll sue. Clara Jensen. You lose the $3.4 million, David, and I have the sworn deposition of every nurse at Autumn Leaves ready for public release. Sign the document or walk away with nothing. Melissa, hysterical, physically forced the pen into his hand. Melissa. Sign it. We need the money, David. Sign it. David signed the confession, sacrificing his pride for the cash. Clara Jensen. Very well. The $3.4 million is yours. Now, for condition 2. Clara stood up, dominating the room. Mrs. Vance stipulated that the $3.4 million must be used to fund a perpetual endowment. The endowment is dedicated to improving the quality of life for neglected seniors in substandard facilities. David's face crumpled. He was forced to fund a charity. Clara Jensen. And the name of this perpetually funded trust, the name that will appear on every plaque, every annual report, every public thank you, is the David Thomas Vance Endowment for Neglected Elders. The physical papers shook in David's hands before he threw them across the room. He had inherited the money, but he was legally bound to use it to fund a charity named after him, dedicated to the very neglect he committed. Clara Jensen. Your mother's intent was clear. David. She wanted to ensure that every good deed done by this endowment will forever remind the community of the betrayal that funded it. The money is your burden, a monument to your shame. The news of the endowment, and the story behind its oddly specific name, swept through their social circle and the local news. The irony was too delicious to ignore. David and Melissa were instantly destroyed. Their carefully constructed facade of dedicated philanthropists shattered. The loss of reputation. David couldn't attend a single charity event without whispers following him. He was forced to publicly talk about the needs of neglected seniors, knowing he was the primary example of the problem. The financial collapse. Melissa left him 6 months later. She hadn't married a man to fund a charity named after his shame. David's business, built on social networking and appearances, collapsed under the weight of his toxic reputation. He had to sell the beautiful house, the one funded by my original life savings, at a loss. I didn't leave him money he could spend. I left him a legacy he could never escape. I taught my son that you can't abandon integrity and then expect to inherit a clean conscience. The David Thomas Vance Endowment lives on, a perpetual reminder that a mother's love and her planning can reach beyond the grave to deliver the ultimate, unforgettable justice. I stood at the window of the Autumn Leaves retirement home, watching my son drive away 2 years ago, thinking I had lost everything. But what I really did was gain the clarity to plan my final, perfect revenge. My son left me in a nursing home, and in return, I left him something he'd never forget: his own name, forever tied to his greatest shame. If you believe that forcing someone to face their own failures is the ultimate justice, share your story in the comments. And if you agree that a mother's love and her planning can reach beyond the grave, hit that like and subscribe button.